Coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast, Marty Friedman reveals in his book that he was lowballed by Megadeth for a recent tour. Category 7 cancels their first ever U.S. tour. I revisit the album The Chemical Wedding by Bruce Dickinson. And last but not least, we remember the late Warrel Dane from Nevermore, who passed away 7 years ago this month. All of that next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. And again, I do thank you for all of your support for this show. And if you like what you see and hear on this program, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And of course, if you are on any other form of social media that you are viewing this show on, please give me a like and a follow there. Lot to talk about today here on this December 15th, 2024. Going to talk about the band Category 7, which is kind of a super group of sorts, canceling their first ever U.S. tour. I'm going to talk about Marty Friedman in his book, talking about how Dave Mustaine and Megadeth lowballed him to go on a recent tour. I'm going to revisit The Chemical Wedding, my favorite Bruce Dickinson solo album. But first, let's talk about Nevermore. Let's talk about Warrel Dane of Nevermore, who sadly passed away 7 years ago this month. He passed away 7 years ago on December 13th, actually. I absolutely love Nevermore. Definitely one of my favorite bands, and a band that had a huge impact on me early on in the show, Warrel Dane being that guy. Warrel Dane and Jim Shepard, actually. And even Jeff Loomis back in the old days. But more Jim and Warrel. And I say that because they were, again, within that first couple of years, one of those bands I ended up getting to meet. I got to hang out with them. Just a really cool group of guys. And if you see this poster, check this out. Autographed by the band on the Dreaming Neon Black tour. That's actually the tour I first met these guys. So, I'm going to talk about how I first ended up getting into music created by the late Warrel Dane. The first album I ever bought was Refuge Denied by Sanctuary, along with Into the Mirror Black. Actually, both of those albums I ended up picking up. We go back to 1994, folks. The dark age of heavy metal, and I'm of course the guy that falls in love with heavy metal music back in the 90s when grunge was the thing and heavy metal was not the thing, and the media tried to kill it. And I remember going into a music store and I see this album called Refuge Denied by Sanctuary, and there was Into the Mirror Black right behind it. And I remember picking up a copy of Refuge Denied. I remember looking at it and saying to myself, produced by Dave Mustaine. Wow, this has got to be really cool. It's got to be heavy metal. Big Megadeth fan back then, of course. Still am a big Megadeth fan. But I got to see his name on the back of that CD. I immediately bought it at the very high price of $5 because all the heavy metal releases were on clearance due to the alleged unpopularity of the genre. And then, of course, I decided to spend another $5 on Into the Mirror Black. So get those albums home. I listened to the song Battle Angels, and I'm like, first of all, I heard Warrel Dane hitting these high notes, and I was blown away. I'm like, this guy is a monster vocalist. He's a phenomenal singer. And, they had a cover of White Rabbit on that album. Into the Mirror Black was a little bit more toned down and a little more progressive, but I loved both of those albums. And sadly, like many other metal bands, they had broken up. And I ended up finding out that Warrel Dane had formed another band with Jim Shepard, the bass player of Sanctuary, called Nevermore. And I ended up picking up the first two Nevermore albums. The first album, then there was an EP called In Memory, I believe. And I ended up getting both of those releases and really liking them a lot. And then, of course, I had followed the band ever since. So The Politics of Ecstasy came out. Really loved that album. And then we have the album Dreaming Neon Black. Now let's go to 1999. I'm a year in on the Metal Command show, about a year after the show started. A guy named Andrew Sample, who worked for Century Media, says, hey, I can get you an interview with Warrel and Jim, and you get to meet them when they come through Cleveland. And obviously, I'm jumping at the chance because I love this band a lot. And I get to I interviewed Jim Shepard on the phone. Then I ended up interviewing Warrel, and then I got to meet them. Now, the autographed poster from Dreaming Neon Black that was signed, of course, the band signed it for me. The late Tim Calvert, who sadly passed away, was the other guitar player, along with Jeff Loomis, and he had obviously Tim Calvert played in Forbidden, so I already knew him from the band Forbidden. I was really excited to meet these guys, and I got to hang out with them. And it was a really, really positive experience. So, and I remember this is really funny. They toured with Iced Earth, and I believe Destiny's End was the opener. Now, Destiny's End was a band fronted by James Rivera. They had an album called Breathe Deep the Dark. Really good group of guys. They also came on my show during that time period, as did John Schaefer from Iced Earth. So I'm going to see 3 bands that I interviewed multiple times that I absolutely love, and they are playing on a tour together. I believe Destiny's End was the opener. I could be wrong, but I know Nevermore toured with Iced Earth and when they came through Cleveland. Now, they came to a venue called Peabody's Down Under, which back then was in a place called the Flats in Cleveland. It was right along right along the river. Sorry, I must have slipped up a little bit there. And I got to see them play at this venue, the small little club. I met a lot of great bands at Peabody's. I met Saxon there. I met Chuck Schuldiner from Death. Met the guys in Hammerfall. I saw Sabotage play there. I mean, I got to see a lot of bands play in that venue. So anyhow, I interviewed Warrel Dane. There's an upstairs backstage room. Him and Jim Shepard, and even Jeff Loomis was in on the interview with us as well. Interviewed all 3 of them. Great people. A lot of fun. So as we're walking downstairs, Warrel pulls me aside and says, you mentioned, because I talked about the first album, Refuge Denied. I talked about the song Battle Angels. Warrel looks at me and said something like along the lines, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he said, there's a guy at Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, the magazine up in Canada, that says I am unable to sing the song Battle Angels. And I looked at him. I said, why does he think that? And I don't remember what he said, but it was an article I guess they had written. And again, or it was maybe an interview this person did. I'm not 100% sure. And I think it was Brave Words. Anyway, he goes and he mentions it to me, and he says, I'm going to go on stage. I'm going to hit every note of that song. You know, me being 20, 21 years old, I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I can't wait to hear it, right? It's the first time I'm seeing this band. Well, they go on stage. About halfway through the set, Warrel Dane gets up on stage and yells, so-and-so from this magazine, I believe it was Brave Words, said, I am incapable of singing Battle Angels. And he goes, F him, I'm going to sing it. He sang it, and he hit every single note on stage. It sounded just like the album. And I'm this kid watching this, and I'm like, holy crap. I mean, Nevermore was such a great band to see live. I went to a lot of their shows over the years. They were just such a phenomenal band from a live perspective. I mean, they were so tight, they were good. Jeff Loomis is a monster guitar player. And Warrel not only was he a great vocalist and frontman, but he was just a really cool dude to talk to and get to know. And he had a lot of witty things to say about anything. I mean, he made a lot of sarcastic comments. I remember one time we were talking about record deals from bands, and he said, you know what? He asked me if I knew what a record deal was. I said, yeah. I go, it's a contract. He goes, no, it's not a contract. It is 60 pages of a band getting effed. That's pretty much what he said to me. But just a very, very positive experience with the guys from Nevermore. Before I end this segment, the last interview I did with Warrel was in 2014. And I remember asking him if he had any last words for the fans listening to the interview. And check out what he said with this clip right here.
Well, I have one more question for you, Warrel, and it was great to have you on my show once again. And do you have any last words to say to the fans, and maybe give out some websites and places where people could check out Sanctuary?
Oh my God! I guess you can do that just about anywhere, checking out stuff about Sanctuary. But if you want a final statement, this is my blanket statement, and I really like it. So just don't get mad at me if it sounds corny, but start your own religion, people, because the ones we have right now are just not working.
And that is the last interview clip from the last interview I ever did with Warrel Dane of Nevermore. Folks, Nevermore had a tremendous impact on myself. Everyone that I knew who was friends with Warrel Dane or knew him personally had nothing but good things to say about him. I always had a positive experience with the guy when I would interview him on my show or when I've met him. And I love the music that he helped create. I still miss the guy to this day. And pretty much everyone who was a fan of Nevermore, of his solo albums, or the albums he did with Sanctuary, all agree he was a definite loss for the metal scene. With that being said, I'm curious, what is your favorite album that he sang on? Mine is The Godless Endeavor by Nevermore. That's my favorite Nevermore album, and favorite album that Warrel sang on. Let me know in the comments. And let me know in the comments any great experiences you had, either meeting Warrel Dane, hanging out with him, whatever. I want to hear what you have to say. So with that said, let's go into the next segment. I'm going to talk about the band Category 7. Category 7, of course, put out an album this past year. And the band is kind of a supergroup of sorts, and it features a lot of different members from some really great heavy metal bands. So John Bush, of course, is the singer. John Bush from Armored Saint, who also sang in Anthrax for a while. Jack Gibson from Exodus is playing bass on this album. You have Phil Demmel, who currently plays with Kerry King's band. Mike Orlando, many of you may remember him from Adrenaline Mob. Jason Bittner, who's also played in a variety of really great thrash bands. And seeing him live with Overkill, the guy is a phenomenal drummer. He plays drums on this album. So you have a lot of really great talent being brought together for this debut album by Category 7. Now, they put a press release out and basically stating they had to cancel their first ever tour, which had them headlining an Exhorter opening. Let me read the press release for you. It states as follows. With the overwhelming competition for the live show dollar, we feel that our projected ticket sales will not be enough for our tour to be profitable, so we have made the painful decision to cancel our tour in March. The cost of touring continues to go up, and while we had no illusion of big profits, at least breaking even was a goal which, after speaking to our agent and the promoters of the shows, did not seem achievable. We appreciate everyone that is enjoying our music, and we will continue to attempt to find a way to bring the live show on the road. In making this decision now, it will enable everyone to get refunds before Christmas, and all VIP purchases will be immediately refunded. Thank you again for the support for Category 7. Okay, there's a lot to talk about there. And where it says, overwhelming competition for the live show dollar and the projected ticket sales not being enough to make it profitable. Okay. Let me preface this. Before I go into this, I'm going to preface what I'm about to say with this. The debut album by Category 7 is a very solid release, in my opinion. I liked the album. I think I might have given it a 7 or an 8 out of 10. I definitely liked the record. All of the guys playing on this album, at least the ones that I've ever encountered, like I don't know Phil Demmel or Bittner or any of those other guys, but I have interviewed John Bush multiple times on my show. And Jack Gibson I met one time when Exodus came and played with Slayer here, probably about 9 or 10 years ago now. Super nice people, actually. John Bush is a really, really nice guy. And he's a phenomenal singer. He's one of my favorite singers ever. And I'm also going to preface it by saying I have no idea what kind of contracts that this band had, what kind of agreements they had in place. I know nothing of their business dealings. What I'm going to tell you, though, is what I think happened and why I think this tour flopped and was pretty much over before it started. In all seriousness, I don't know about any of their business dealings as facts. So this is all opinion. I want to make sure that you all know that it is an opinion. And aside from listing out how many followers these bands have on Facebook or Spotify, I don't know any other factual information about what happened except what I know about how these tours get booked, how they get promoted, etc., etc. So this thing flopped for 3 reasons. Unrealistic expectations, bad publicity, and a lukewarm response to the record. So let me start with the unrealistic expectations. So, and again, this has nothing to do with the character of the guys in this band. I wish this tour would have happened, and I wish that they would be successful. But folks, that's not what happened. And I think this tour was booked with unrealistic expectations. So what do I mean by that? First of all, I'm looking at the rooms that they are booking. I'm looking at the venues this band is booking to play this headlining tour. Now, mind you, this is a headlining tour for a band that just released their debut album, which is not something that typically happens. I'm looking at the venues. So I mentioned bands like Armored Saint. I mentioned bands like Exodus. I mentioned bands like Overkill, Kerry King's solo stuff. I'm looking at these rooms and I'm like, these are the kinds of venues that those bands would be booking, not a band that just released their debut album that doesn't really have much of a following left. So when I say unrealistic expectations, what probably happened is they thought that because they are in all of these other bands that are well known, that they could book those same venues, and they had this illusion, I think, at least the booking agents might have had this illusion, and even the promoters at first, that they were going to draw a lot of people. Folks, it doesn't work like that. I don't care how many great musicians you have getting together on a lot of these albums. It is a huge uphill battle to establish a band and a project like this. And what they needed to do was to go back to basics, go back to the grind, almost start from the ground up to really build a following for this band. And when I say ground up, for these guys that have been around a long time, I'm talking about like an opening slot with one of their contemporaries. Maybe opening for Testament, for example. Maybe getting, Testament, another band, Exhorder, who's going to be the opening band for them. Testament, Exhorder, Category 7. Something like that. Because, folks, they don't have much of a following. And to tell you how absurd this is, let's take a look at these Spotify numbers. Exhorder and Category 7. Let's look at these Spotify numbers right here. Exhorder has 103,000 followers and listeners on Spotify. Category 7, as of now, has 6,800 people following them on Spotify. Now, if you look at the Facebook pages, Exhorder has 71,000 followers. Category 7 is 10,000. So not only are you trying to book a headlining tour from a band that does not have a big following, but the opening band has a lot more followers than these guys. When I saw this coming to Cleveland and I saw the venue they were playing, I had a feeling this tour, I'm thinking to myself, who's going to buy tickets to this? This band has no following. I mean, I would buy a ticket to it because I do like the album and I like the musicians on it. But realistically, a new band like this cannot play by the same rules that they play in the bands where all of these guys come from. And that is what happened. That's what I mean by unrealistic expectations. They probably tried to front load the merchandise with deposits from the venues. They probably wanted to rent an expensive vehicle and bring a crew. And probably the money that they wanted was unrealistic for a band of their size. That's probably what happened. Nothing personally against these guys, but business is business. And again, what they need to do is go back to the grind. Bring this project from the ground up. Go open for one of these other heavy metal bands that these guys are probably friends with. Play the festival circuit. Go play festivals in Europe. You have like the Bang Your Head Festival. I'm sure these guys could get a slot at Wacken. Get the name out there before you go on a headlining tour. Go and open for some bigger bands. You know, once people that are fans of, like, let's say, for example, they open for Testament. I'm just going to throw that out there. Let's say you had Testament, Exhorter, and Category 7. People are going to see John Bush going up there. They're going to see Phil Demmel going up there. They're going to see, oh, wow, these guys are in a lot of other great bands. And then the band will build a following, maybe come out with another album, and then try the headlining tour if you gain enough of a following. But unfortunately, they don't have a big following, and not a lot of people know about them, which leads me into the second reason this flopped. Bad publicity. When they put this press release out that they were canceling the tour, one of the most common things I saw that people were saying in the threads and in the comments were, who are these guys? I never heard of them. My own personal page, when I posted it, I had several comments that stated, who are these guys? I've never heard of them. Folks, that is a problem. That means the label or whoever is in charge of their publicity did not do the job they needed to do. Folks, there is more music coming out in one day in 2024 than came out the entire year of 1989. When a band has publicity, you have to saturate the internet. The band has to do more interviews than they've possibly ever done. And you have to saturate your presence on the internet for people to even know about you. And I think the way that this album was probably treated is people are treating it like, oh, they're treating it like these guys are in the bands that they came from. They're treating it like, oh, I'm promoting an Exodus album or I'm promoting an Armored Saint album. It's not how it is. You're promoting a brand new band with a brand new name. And when you have lots of people still saying, I've never heard of this band, that is an epic failure on the promotion of the album. Not to mention the fact that I feel like this band got more publicity canceling the tour than they did for the record. Again, that is my opinion. And let's go to the last reason why this failed. The album had a very lukewarm reception from people. Now, what do I mean by lukewarm? I didn't see a lot of comments saying the album sucked. I mean, you're going to have that. I did not see a lot of comments where people saying it was one of the greatest things they've ever heard. You had a lot of people saying the album's not bad. It's decent. It's solid. But it's nothing mind-blowing, and it's not really bringing anything to the table that's new. And I think and when I say that, I'm talking about social media comments, not talking about reviewers, because most reviewers will give an album a great review to earn some kind of rapport with the record company. Not everybody does that. I don't do that. There's a lot of other reviewers that do not do that, but you have a lot of people that will. I look at the comments and the reactions to when bands release videos or make announcements, or you see a band in the press. And the majority of people basically thought the album was decent. They listened to it. They didn't say it was bad. Most people didn't say it was terrible. And they moved on. And this goes back into what I said, that when a band releasing a debut album, going on a headlining tour is unrealistic. Because realistically, you're not going to hit it out of the park on the debut. Most bands don't. These guys all decided to work together, making an album, all of them together for the first time. The second album is usually better anyway. And the other thing is, when you have guys from all these great bands getting together, the expectations also get sky high. They get sky high. The expectations soar. And I can't name very many albums that came out that had people from a lot of other really great established bands that were better or as good as the bands those people all came from. I can't name very many. You could probably name some successful albums, but I cannot name one instance where all these people get together, make this album where it's better than the bands they all came from. So that's what happened. At least in my opinion, that's what I think happened. Now, I like the album. I thought it was solid. To me, it suffers from something that's a big plague in the metal scene, and that's clone bands. When I say clone bands, meaning that, when I listen to this record, it doesn't offer anything new. It sounds like a mix of all of the bands these guys play in, which isn't terrible, but it's nothing mind-blowing I'm going to keep listening to this. It's still pretty good, but it's missing something. That's what I mean by lukewarm response. I wish these guys the most success in the world. I really wish this tour would have taken off. Because at least of the ones that I know in the band, they're pretty good guys. They got together. They're musicians. They're trying to make a living. I get it. But unfortunately, there were a lot of unrealistic expectations made when booking the tour. What I would like to see, at least in my opinion, is for them to go and open for a bigger band, especially a band of like their contemporaries that they know really well. I think that would be the best scenario. And if they were to do a small... And see, the thing is, they're not going to go open for Exhorder. Exhorder does not have the following that the bands these guys all come from have. So they're not going to do that. But maybe you get a bigger headliner, get Exhorder on the bill, Category 7 on the bill, go out on the road, try to establish this thing. So, folks, that is the reason why I think this flopped. Going to take a break here. When I come back, I'm going to talk about Marty Friedman getting lowballed by Megadeth, and I'm also going to revisit the album The Chemical Wedding by Bruce Dickinson. I'll be right back after this. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support. Back here on the Metal Command podcast, Tony here with you. Let's talk about Marty Friedman coming out in his book and talking about getting lowballed by Megadeth. And I'm going to read the excerpt that I found online from the book. Check this out. It says, in his new book, Dreaming Japanese, Friedman reveals that he met with Megadeth in 2015 to discuss a reunion and received a pretty insulting salary offer. Friedman notes that he would have been paid less in a week with Megadeth than he makes in a single day through his work in Japan, which is not great. So here's the quote from Friedman. Let's just say he wasn't even in the ballpark. Hell, he wasn't even in the parking lot for the ballpark. The amount they offered was right around the first salary I got when I joined Megadeth in 1990. If I'd had any idea they would lowball me like this, I never would have met them in Anaheim. Had I taken that offer, I would have been paid less in a week than I made in a normal day in Japan. I was stunned and angry and told them I couldn't even consider it. I made a counter offer, which was the bare minimum I could accept and far less than I received from any of the artists I've toured with in Japan. I have some thoughts on this. First of all, I think it is absolutely insulting that Dave Mustaine would lowball this guy. And I'm going to tell you why. Couple things. First of all, I think Megadeth would have benefited a lot from Marty Friedman going on and playing on tour with them. Now, why do I say that? Marty Friedman was... So, when people go and think of Megadeth, what's like the first thing they think of? They think of Rust in Peace. They think of Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine on stage together. You can argue that the band was at the peak of its success when Marty Friedman was in the band. You had Rust in Peace, Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia, Cryptic Writings. Those 4 albums alone, I think, are monster. I think all 4 of those records are great. Now, you did have Risk. Not really going to go into that one. Not a great record. Should have been a Dave Mustaine solo album because I think it would have not received as much criticism. But Marty was arguably part of the most successful era of Megadeth. People view Rust in Peace as like the landmark album. And so when you say, hey, when you go to most people and say, hey, who's your favorite Megadeth guitar player that Dave Mustaine brought in? They're going to say Marty Friedman. Almost everybody says that. I would say that. I think it's Marty Friedman followed by Kiko Luero. Here's the thing. Dave Mustaine, to his credit, has always brought in top-notch musicians into Megadeth. He always has. He has always brought great players into that band. He has a tremendous eye for talented musicians. And I would say, for a majority of their career, he brought in the right guys to play on these albums. Now, there's a couple eras where I'm not a big fan, where he had people that the chemistry really was a little bit off. Like the album World Needs a Hero, for example. Chemistry was probably... It felt off with Al Pitrelli and Jimmy DeGrasso. Both great musicians, but you just didn't feel the chemistry within the band. I think a couple of the albums with Chris Broderick playing on them, chemistry felt a little bit off. But for the most part, throughout the entire band's career, I think Dave Mustaine picked a lot of great people, and they fit really well in a lot of these albums. And I would probably say, of any band in the Big Four, I would say Megadeth is probably, along with maybe Anthrax, is probably, I think Megadeth's the most consistent, honestly. Megadeth and Anthrax are my 2 favorite bands out of, the Big Four, Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth. So he has always had a talent for doing that. And Dave Mustaine is like one of the best people at writing a very catchy guitar riff. But to lowball Marty Friedman is a travesty. And it's egregious. And it's ridiculous. This is a guy... This isn't just any other guitar player that played in Megadeth. This is the guy that if you go and ask somebody, who would you love to come back to Megadeth, almost every person would say Marty Friedman. He's that good of a musician. He is that good of a guitar player. And to lowball him, not only is it ridiculous, but it is a huge mistake. Because Marty Friedman would sell tickets for you. The band would bring in more money with Marty Friedman on stage with Dave. You would get people that haven't seen Megadeth in a long time going to see them. You could easily put a lot of press and publicity into that. Marty Friedman would perform very well on stage because the guy is a phenomenal musician on top of a guitar player. So he would definitely come prepared. And it is a huge mistake they did not bring him on tour. It's a shame. Shame on Dave Mustaine for not doing that. Lowballing that guy, to me, huge mistake. With that being said, let's move into the last part of the podcast. Let's have some fun. Let's revisit The Chemical Wedding by Bruce Dickinson. So, everybody remembers when The Accident of Birth came out. Everybody remembers Chemical Wedding coming out after that. Two really phenomenal albums. And back in 1998, I remember when The Chemical Wedding came out, there were a lot of great heavy metal releases at the time that I absolutely loved. You know, Halloween had Better Than Raw. Gravedigger had Knights of the Cross. You had Blind Guardian with Nightfall, Middle Earth. And metal was really kind of starting to, its comeback was starting. Bruce had Accident of Birth, which I saw on tour in 1997. Like maybe 300 people showed up, which, thinking about that now and looking at how big Iron Maiden is still, kind of hard to believe, but that was the 1990s. But I saw the show that he played in 1997 on the Accident of Birth tour. Roy Z was playing there. Adrian Smith playing on stage with them. I mean, Bruce was on. It was unbelievable. Then you had The Chemical Wedding, which is my favorite Bruce Dickinson album. A much different record, actually. And I'm going to play an interview clip here with Roy Z when, I think I interviewed Roy back in like 2011. He talked about The Chemical Wedding because I asked him about the approach to that album. Check this interview clip out right here.
With Chemical Wedding, that seems to be a huge fan favorite, and it's my favorite Bruce Dickinson solo album. And what was it like recording that record? Talk a little bit about the making of that album, and tell the fans what it was like to record that record.
Right. Well, yeah, it was it was just this vision, and we just worked on it was cool. We did Accident of Birth, and we could have easily done Accident of Birth Part 2. That would have been a success, I'm sure. But, we just went for it, I was in a cool space, really good space musically at the time, and I still, different spaces. But it was really, I remember really feeling it, that album and that style that came out of there, And it's just kind of experimental, and it's just like, there was no instrument that we wouldn't try to use, so there's different types of synths and stuff in there that was really cool, I don't know, I don't think people were down-tuning that much in heavy metal at that time, so that was fun to do. We were sticking bass strings on our guitars and stuff, and Adrian was really into it at that, he was into it before, but right there he found his slot, he was like, yeah. And, he played some amazing leads on both of those records, but I like Chemical Wedding, what he did a lot.
That's Roy Z talking about the approach to the album The Chemical Wedding. So for me personally, the album has some of the heaviest music that Bruce has ever done, and some of the most epic music he has ever done. Now, a lot of the album, of course, was based off of the works of William Blake, which is really funny because I had interviewed Bruce in 1999, initially when he rejoined Iron Maiden, and that was his alias of the hotel he was at. It's kind of funny, actually. So but it was based on the works of William Blake, and it was a kind of a darker album than Accident of Birth. You know, you didn't have as many up-tempo songs, but I would say it was a little bit of a darker album, a little bit more of an epic feel to that record. And Bruce Dickinson toured. He went on a world tour. You know, you have the live, I think it was, they had a live album they recorded in Brazil, Scream For Me Brazil, or something like that. I don't remember what it was called now. I should probably look that up. But he did have a live album that came out. He did go on a world tour. However, Bruce Dickinson, sadly, did not tour the U.S. for the Chemical Wedding. And I'm going to go back to the interview I did with him in 1999 where he talked about why. Check out this interview clip as to why Bruce did not tour the USA for the Chemical Wedding album. Here you go.
When I came up with an American tour, which was, I mean, it was a great tour. It was, I think, it was myself and Anthrax, and now I forget who the third act on the bill was going to be, but it was going to be basically like a real hot young, metal band. Yeah. It was a great tour. I mean, the venues, everything was just like there, and they were like, no, we're not going to put any tour support up for it. And then, to make life more interesting, I said, well, okay, I'll pay for the tour. I just want to know that you're going to, go out and really promote the, excuse me, sneeze, and really promote the album like crazy and stuff. They wouldn't guarantee to do that either. Which kind of hacked me off, because it was a great record. Yeah, wow. I mean, it really bummed me out because there I was getting like front covers and all the rest of it in all these magazines throughout the world, and particularly in North America. And I'm like, Jesus, wow, okay, well, and fortunately there was an opportunity to terminate the contract, so I did.
And that's Bruce Dickinson talking about why he did not tour the United States for the Chemical Wedding album. Now, keep in mind, that clip, there was a long rant about the record company at the time, CMC International. He went on this long rant. I cut that out because there's a lot of things that really aren't relevant today. But essentially, as you heard him say, even when he decided to put up money for the tour, the label just didn't want to promote it or do anything with it, which I think is absolutely stupid. But that's part of the reason he went on a rant for like 5-10 minutes about that record label to begin with. And that interview was done right around the time he was announced. It was announced that he was rejoining Iron Maiden. Now, I ended up getting to go see Iron Maiden in Cleveland that year. That's when I ended up getting to meet Bruce briefly. Very nice guy. The guys in Iron Maiden, as I said in a previous podcast, Nickel McBrain, really cool dude. But they put on a hell of a show. I remember in that show, too, someone threw a bottle at Bruce, and he went ballistic and started screaming at the crowd. This was in Cleveland. It was at a place called Nautica, downtown Cleveland. So, anyway, a song like Killing Floor, one of the heaviest songs Bruce has ever done. Book of Thel, probably my favorite song on the album, but you had Gates of Urizen. The reissue, there was a reissue of the album not long ago. There was a B-side called Real World that I think was a great song. But it was overall just kind of a darker feel. Now, many people, when you talk about Bruce Dickinson's solo career, usually when you ask people what is their favorite album, it's usually either this one or Accident of Birth. And it's kind of like 50-50 when people say that. Very few people will say it's any other album but those two. But it's kind of like, it's kind of like even keeled. Like, which one do you like better? Do you like the more upbeat album in Accident of Birth? Or do you like the kind of darker record with The Chemical Wedding? I think The Chemical Wedding had a few more elements musically. But overall, it's my favorite Bruce Dickinson album, even still to this day. Now, his newest album, I thought was actually still pretty good. Tyranny of Souls I thought was good, but The Chemical Wedding, man, that's like money for me. That is such a great record. And, it came out in 1998. I think it was I'd like to say number 2. I think it was my third favorite release that year. And again, a lot of great heavy metal albums came out in 1998. They really did. You know, you had, like I said, Nightfall Middle Earth by Blind Guardian. Phenomenal record. You had Better Than Raw by Halloween. Still one of, if not my favorite album by them. The band Rage came out with an album called 13. Running Wild had the album The Rivalry. You had what was the other release? Oh, Knights of the Cross by Gravedigger. Just so many great records. So before I end it off here, I want to know, what is your favorite Bruce Dickinson solo album? Where do you rank The Chemical Wedding in the Bruce Dickinson discography? I'm curious. Where do you rank it? Is it your favorite album? Is it your second favorite? Third? I'm curious. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know where you have this album ranked. And with that said, thanks for watching the Metal Command podcast. Again, if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, hit the subscribe button. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you are following this show on any other form of social media, give me a like and a follow there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay metal.